How do we feel about authority? Well, as an authority figure myself, I have thoughts. One of the things you really have to keep in mind about Milgram is that although he was really focused on how people respond to authority figures, he might not have thought about his own role as an authority figure as much as he should have. You kind of have to see all the perspectives, even your own, when you're doing a scholarship, and particularly your own, I would think. Particularly if you're doing it on the level that Milgram was. Milgram was kind of a rock star scientist of the time. People knew who he was, and people knew this study. So, knowing more about his major area of concern, authority, I think is given. And I'm the boss, so we're going to do it. Let's talk about authority. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about when I was working part-time before I got my current gig. One of my jobs was teaching Introduction to Sociology at an area community college. Now, I didn't know a lot about sociology. You think that would have come up in the job interview, but I did it well enough to where I eventually was nominated for a teaching award, much to my surprise. One of the things I learned about sociology was that if you don't know where an idea came up with, you can pretty much guess Max Weber and have a pretty good chance of being correct. Max Weber is a German sociologist who basically invented the field of sociology. He talked about a lot of stuff, but one of the biggest things that he's known for is his discussion of the Protestant work ethic. I could tell you all about it, or we could watch a brief video narrated by Stephen Fry, which is going to be much more entertaining.
Encouraged a different attitude to work, with far-reaching effects. Calvinists believed in predestination. Those who pursue religion often turn away from worldly affairs. They're suspicious of wealth and business, preferring an ascetic life of contemplation and prayer. The sociologist and economist Max Weber argued that after the Reformation, one form of Christian Protestantism, Calvinism, encouraged a different attitude to work, with far-reaching effects. Calvinists believed in predestination. A precise number of souls would go to heaven. The lucky ones had places reserved by God. However, most Calvinists were terrified there would be no seat awaiting them in paradise. They were always on the lookout for signs that they had been saved. One clear indication that they were on the guest list was that they were actively contributing to their community through their work. In his book, The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism, Weber argued that the Calvinists' need to reassure themselves through their industry was an important factor in the growth of capitalism in Northern Europe. They built up businesses that generated wealth, but at the same time lived thrifty lives. They reinvested any surplus and so helped fuel capitalism. Eventually, capitalism would have a life and momentum of its own. But according to Weber at least, its initial impetus came from a theological source.
Now, the basic idea is that if you work hard, God will reward you. And then you reinvest that work in your communities, building up area wealth. But this isn't really how we think about the Protestant work ethic anymore. We think about it as hard work being essential to success. And not just hard work being essential to success, but hard work being a requirement of success, to where there's this relationship there. If you work hard, you will succeed. And it pervades our culture in a lot of ways. It becomes a guiding principle which people use to help determine whether they're good. to help determine whether people are good, to help determine what good means. There's a problem with this, though. If hard work equals success, then what does it mean if you don't succeed? What does it mean if you're a failure? Well, if hard work equals success because God blessed you for working hard, then it means if you're a failure, you must be a bad person. I think we're more apt as a society to believe the first part. I think a lot of people believe the second part, that failure must mean you're bad, more than would admit, though. And I think that the question we really have to ask ourselves is, who benefits from thinking like this? Who benefits from thinking that people who succeed must have succeeded because they're good people, and people who failed must have failed because they're bad people? And when you start to ask questions like that, who benefits, you start to come up with some fairly interesting answers. Authority. Authority is the term we use for the people who are better than us, but not just the people who are better than us, the people who rule us, the people who should rule us. And when we start thinking about authority and authority figures, lots of people think that authority figures must become authority figures because they have earned it, because they have embodied the values that are essential for being a good person, because they have worked hard. And it becomes a tendency in our culture for that structure, the people who have succeeded, the authority people, to become the top of our society. Max Weber talked about this as well, and he came up with 3 types of authority: traditional authority, charismatic authority, and rational legal authority. We're going to take them one at a time. Let's start with traditional authority. Traditional authority is authority invested in a group or a structure because that's the way it has always been. When someone is born, they tend to be born into an area that has fairly firm, fairly consistent religious beliefs. People in America tend to be Christian. Moreover, they tend to be Protestant. People born in other places tend to move towards other branches of religion. If you're in Russia, you're born into a system where the Eastern Orthodoxy is the dominant religion. People who are born in India tend to be born into Hinduism. People who are born in parts of the Middle East tend to be born into Islam, and so on and so forth. Why are you more likely to be a Hindu if you're born in India? Why are you more likely to be a Protestant if you're born in America? Why are you more likely to be a Catholic if you're born in France? Because that's the way it's always been. Systems of authority get built up momentum. Because it has always been done this way, this is the way you're going to continue to do it. It's why some countries like England have a hard time letting go of structures like the monarchy. As I'm filming this, it's the day where Prince Charles became King Charles III, officially coronated and all that. Now, granted, being a monarch doesn't mean the same thing it used to mean, but if you're British, you have an innate relationship built in with monarchy. Whether you're like my mom, who inexplicably likes the monarchy, or if you're like the punk who inexplicably hates the monarchy, it's in a part of your life because it's always been a part of your life. If we want to get more specific, in North Korea, you are ruled by a descendant of the previous dictator, who was a descendant of the dictator before that. That's just how they do it there. And the fact that it is the guiding stone of their history that this is how we do it, we've always done it that way, builds in a certain amount of authority. Who are you to question history and tradition? At least that's the thought. Charismatic authority runs the gamut. Lots of people get authority because they're just so darn interesting. You can't take your eyes off them. You want to hear them. And people tend to follow certain figures because they're charismatic, more so than what they actually say. And this can run the gamut of possible political orientations, possible ethical orientations. Martin Luther King Jr. was very charismatic. Listen to his speech. Adolf Hitler was very charismatic. Listen to his speech. Even if you don't understand it, you have a very hard time not feeling the emotions that he's able to manipulate. People loved President Ronald Reagan because he was very charismatic. The man popped on a screen. Obama popped on a screen. When we're talking about charismatic authority, it's authority by the people who just reach out and grab us. Rational legal authority is when authority comes from a codified set of rules and regulations. Why do you do things this way? Because it has been written. And does that seem silly to you? It seems silly to me, but it's hard to not give credence to the amount of power this has. Written rules don't exist just on their own. They need some kind of backbone to keep them going. So it leads to organizations whose job is to follow and enforce rules. The Bureau of Motor Vehicles exists to make sure everybody's following the same rules and follows the same procedures. Bureaucrats exist to make sure that organizations that follow the rules and procedures and exist because the rules and procedures can run. And these systems can get a life of their own. If you've ever waited for a driver's license, you understand the power the BMV has over you. So, those are 3 types of authority. The question is, do we trust authority? Do we think, well, they're the authority for a reason. These rules must be here for a reason. These people must be popular for a reason. We must have always done it this way for a reason. Is that a good way to go about living and thinking? Well, authority figures can do some stuff that's a little wrong now. Go online and you can see there are huge catalogs of doctors endorsing cigarettes. Sounds stupid to us now, but doctors were authority figures. They were using cigarette advertising. Let's take this back around to our previous discussion about work and the idea that hard work leads to success, and if you succeed, it's because you're working hard and must be a good person. Is this a narrative that we still see in our society? The drive to work very hard, it's one that definitely gets weaponized. As I'm filming this video, there's currently a writer's strike going on, and this showed up on Twitter today. The CEO of Warner Brothers Discovery says, "Love of working will end the writer's strike." Who cares about being compensated? We just love to work. We need to work, so we're going to go back to work. So this is what he thinks will happen. It is, however, an idea that people are really starting to question now. The reward for good work is more work? Well, it kind of reminds me of my time as a teenager working in fast food. Do you get rewarded for working hard? Well, the data is a bit iffy because productivity since 1950 has increased massively. Wages? Not so much. There's a fairly interesting subreddit called Anti-Work, which is a big player in the anti-capitalist movement now, that shows that a lot of people, at least, are starting to really question the idea that hard work and success go hand in hand and mean you're a good person. So, what does this have to do with Stanley Milgram? Well, there's a Milgram quote that I ran across, which is particularly interesting for me. It is a mistake to infer ethical values from actual behavior of people in concrete situations. Coming from Stanley Milgram, this seems a little rich to me. If I own a business and make people work a lot without rewarding them, I think that does say something about my ethics. If I'm a worker who thinks that I have to work above and beyond the call of duty without thinking of reward because it'll naturally come, I think that says something about my ethics too. Ethics, though, are tricky because you really have to look at perspective. Everybody's thoughts, values, and feelings and ethics are going to be different because they're in different places. What looks like salvation to someone might look like damnation to someone else. And that's just one of the reasons we have to think about this stuff in depth. It's required. So that is authority. Not the final word on it, but it's enough to get you really going and enough to really get you thinking. Now, the thing is, whenever we talk about authority, we're talking about big power structures and how they influence lots of people. So politics are going to be a part of it. You cannot talk about authority without talking about politics a certain amount. And I know that makes some people uncomfortable, but my goal here is to try to make you a little bit uncomfortable, to push your buttons, to get you thinking of things. I'm not saying you have to believe in everything I say here. I'm not sure I believe in everything I say here. But I have to admit that part of my job is playing with that, how you think about your teachers, because if I can get you to think in new, interesting ways, I think it's worth it. At least that's always been my guiding principle. I look forward to seeing what you're writing about authority. See you next video.